Hey, everybody, welcome back to another edition of Hunt the Habitat with Ann Jandernaw. My name is Steve Blazer, and today we are going to talk about late season strategies. How are you doing?
Doing great. It's the quiet time now.
It's the quiet time. Now, what makes this the quiet time? This is hunting season.
You gotta look at it from my perspective. Everyone went home.
Well, I just spent a couple of nights out in the woods sleeping in my camper with the dogs and chasing birds. And as a matter of fact, just got home last night and I got caught out in a couple of squalls. I was up near the Wisconsin UP line. We didn't have a lot of snow that stuck, unlike further south.
Or west of you.
Or west, yeah. How much did you get?
There's only 2 inches, but it was what came after that was 4 above.
See, and we didn't get that either. It got down into the teens. But I did get caught out in the woods in a couple of squalls. One of them was ice pellets for about 15 minutes. It was not pleasant.
Just go sit underneath a hemlock.
There we go. Luckily I was 10 minutes from the camper. So we just kind of beat feet over and got into the truck and warmed up. But and then the other time I had a pretty good snow squall. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, the wind was coming really hard and couldn't see 100 yards. It was coming down pretty good, but it didn't stick. We had a little bit of residual snow, but along the edges of the logging roads and stuff like that. But not enough to talk about. You got worse, and down here in east central Wisconsin, where I live, we still have snow on the grass, even though it's been close to 40 today. They got 3 to 4 inches, and now it's disappearing.
Okay.
So, but we want to talk about late season strategies, and I guess the first and obvious question is, what do you consider late season?
I consider late season when the birds actually shift into their winter habitat. And at this point, when you notice that the salad is gone from the floor of the trails or in the cuts, when that's gone, they're going to shift. And if you check their crops also change what they have inside them for food. So you'll go from a salad to catkins, buds, little tiny pieces of twig, possibly an occasional tip of a fern or something that basically was sheltered from being killed by the frost. But it's the shift in the diet. And the shift in the diet basically changes where the birds are going to be found. And their world becomes smaller. I've said it before, it becomes one-stop shopping for them. You change your strategies a little bit. You change where you hunt. And you also sort of change the cover that you're looking at. So it's brought on by the weather. And the weather affects the food source. And the food source determines where the birds are going to go. And the weather also determines how much these birds are going to move. And at this point, their food needs to be very close by. The birds don't have a lot of fat on them, so it's real easy for them to burn fat. So like, for instance, when it's below 20 degrees in temperature, these birds have to speed up their metabolism. I'm referring to the ruffed grouse. The snowbird woodcock have already gone south.
In 2 days of hunting, when I was up there, I did not move a woodcock. I mean, I was kind of hoping we'd blunder into 1 or 2 late ones, but we did not move a single one.
Yeah, ours weren't here that long. It was like
Same
here today and gone in 2 days, and it was right before the front came in, and I was watching them in one place. I came down a road, and it was just at sunrise, and it was still pretty dark. You needed your headlights. And I'm watching these woodcock literally fly from one side to the other. And I saw 15, but I kept seeing birds flying back and forth.
Yeah, and we never got into a situation where it was hot and heavy. We found birds, but they were scattered. And we'd get into a cover and move 4 or 5 woodcock, but we never saw that wonderful situation where you go, oh my God, how am I going to get my dog out of these woods?
Mm-hmm.
Um, we never saw anything close to that. And we were up last week, but it was raining too. It
Mm-hmm.
was raining on and off. We'd lose the morning and then hunt the afternoon, even though the woods were wet, or vice versa. Um, and, yes, we had some nice shooting from woodcock, but it was never the type of shooting that you like to have when the flight, and dog work, more importantly, that you like to have when the flights are in. We never really saw that.
Yeah, I mean, I found them, and I know some of the other guys over in Price and Sawyer and Douglas County were finding pretty good numbers. And then up in the UP, I heard about them finding them. But for the most part,
Mm-hmm.
when that barometric pressure starts dropping, those birds,
Mm-hmm.
move right out. So it is what it is. That's just how it goes with them. They're here and then they're gone.
Yeah. Can I ask you another question about the change in diet? So, obviously, if there's 2 inches of snow, okay, covering the salad, yeah, that it's obvious there's going to be a change. But for instance, now where I was up in the northeastern part of Wisconsin, nothing was covered, but we were getting lows in the low 20s.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but during the day, it got over freezing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we were seeing highs in the 35-degree range. So, what's the point, if you can answer this, what's the point at which, even though the salad is visible and there, okay, the birds make their shift? Or do they concentrate on the greens as long as they possibly can until there's snow covering them?
Well, it's not snow covering them, it's the frost killing them.
Okay.
It's the frost that's taking away the salad. Think about putting your salad in the freezer.
Mm-hmm.
They're not fond of it too much either.
Okay. So when we start seeing those lows in the low 20s, is it fair to say that's probably the time that the transition starts to take place?
It's a combination. It's a combination of the weather and the lows and the food changing, and they're just instinctively they have like a guide within themselves to saying, okay, now it's time for us to start to group up. It's we've got to shift, and I got to think that the food doesn't taste quite as well. It's no different than when they're dealing with aspen early season. They're gonna go after the aspen leaves that are the freshest, not the ones that are dried out. So when those aspen leaves get dried out and everything, and they're not soft and flexible, then it's time to switch to something else. And that's how they work through the food source. Okay, the dogwood berries are great. The dogwood berries are gone. The crab apples, oh, we're gonna eat those. Oh, they're gone. There might be a few on the ground, but pretty much they keep moving on. They keep shifting food sources that are available at different times of the season. So it's a change in food sources and also a change in instinctively knowing that the hens are going to group up together. They're going to group up in amongst those males, like the males that I found this spring. I've gone back and checked areas and that, and yep, there's the birds. So I know where to take my pups for some dog work because I want to get multiple flushes if I can, because just basically to keep reinforcing the pattern. If I can reinforce that pattern 2 to 3 times, then I've made huge strides with the pups on one particular run.
All right. You started to talk a little bit about changing covers
Mm-hmm.
and changing where we hunt and what kind of cover we're looking at.
When I think about this, just an aspen cut late season isn't going to do it. First off, the aspen is either male or female, the trees, and the female aspen buds are nutrient deficient, whereas the male aspen buds hold all the nutrients and the best carbohydrates, fat, and protein. And they're a bigger bud, and the birds like to eat those. But that doesn't happen until the trees are about 25 plus years old. that they start utilizing those particular male aspen trees to bud on. So, and we've talked about the birds don't have much fat. You can see that when you breast one out. But also, these birds are going to move in and amongst areas that they can find food. And you have to understand, you could go and say, okay, there's a few aspen trees. Well, that's not enough. There's times that they're not going to want to be up in the tree. There's times they're going to want to have catkins from a hazel brush. And there's other times that they're going to use that hazel brush as a corridor to go from the pines to where they're going to feed, maybe at night, or they use that corridor of hazel brush or other thick, dense shrub components to basically move undetected, by avian predators. And it's hard to get into some of those really thick patches and be able to walk through them. Many times I've had my clients and I circle a patch of hazel brush, the dog's on point, and out bust bird after bird after bird. It's pretty cool. But one of the things that these birds then move into the groups where the males are. And the male's habitat, if you remember, has to support them year-round. So that habitat's going to have some pines in it. This habitat's going to have close-by food source. It's going to have good escape areas. It's going to have good transition areas where a bird can keep shifting undetected. It's not going to be right out in the open. And that's what that male needs. And that hen is programmed to go find the other males. And so what happens is that you'll have multiple males set up, and you've heard me talk about Harry and Charlie and Jack and Jim, and they all set up, and they're each very territorial, and they're 8 to 10 acres, and they don't like each other, and the hens will basically move in amongst those multiple males' habitat, and that's where they'll spend the winter. So it's a combination of where you could say a bunch of different habitat comes together. If it's just aspen and there's no understory, it's really not worth a lot. That is not good habitat. But if it's young aspen, basically once the leaves are gone, any bird that's out in young aspen is a sitting duck. That's not to say some crazy bird might go in there and try it out. There's always someone like that. But basically, they need to be able to find habitat that either protects them from the elephants. Sounded like I said protected them from the elephants.
The DNR. I heard the DNR was experimenting with bringing those in.
Yeah,
so first turkeys,
the
now
from
elephants.
The elephants. I'm trying so hard to talk this.
Wisconsin, we got our turkeys from Missouri. They were brought in back in the 70s. I don't know where they're getting the elephants, though. I haven't heard that
yet. See, now. That derailed me for sure. That doesn't take much.
Protection from the elements.
Yes, protection from the elements. Now, I wonder what I'm going to trip over next. So, basically, the grouse needs protection from the elements, not the elephants. And at that point, they have to be protection from the wind, from the snow, or transitioning rain and sleet. And think about it. When you look at snow coming in, what's the last place that the snow builds up? It's underneath all those conifers.
Under the pines. Yeah. Yep. Pines are really important in this conversation, aren't they?
Yes. Yep. They need the qualities of low-hanging branches. They need to be able to catch. Some of these pines will be able to catch the sunlight at different times of the day. Angle right in there. It's not like ground and 4 feet and then pine. No, it's ground in 1.5 feet, barely, just enough to let the rays cast in. And at certain times of the day, they use those areas. And I hate to put it this way. If you find an area where I seem to find birds here at 10:30, look at the shaft of light if it happens to be a sunny day and see how it's angling in. That's something to think about. And it never hurts to go in under those pines and look around and see if there's any droppings. But even at that, watch to see if your dog does a double back or spends a little extra time in there. More than likely, there's been birds spending time in there. Maybe the scent's not fresh, but that's an indicator like, there's something going on here. Remember this.
They're around.
Yeah. And then imprint it in your mind what that looks like. And then you find another one, you see the dog doing it, and you're thinking, okay, I remember that one. And then look at it and say, which way is this facing? What time of day would that sun come in there? Those are all things to think about. So,
Okay.
food source pines, a little bit older aspen interspersed with some pines. Good shrub component is key, and a place to get out of the weather and a place to escape. And the food source has to be basically fast food source. We're not sitting down waiting or driving a long distance for it, that's for sure. So that's what their idea is, fast food.
Now, and when we talk about pines, okay, sometimes we are in a cut and maybe it's an older cut, but there's pines, but they're interspersed. We've all seen those cuts where, oh, goody, there's pines here. Okay, but they're, every 50 yards, there's one or two. Okay, and they're interspersed throughout the cut.
Mm-hmm.
Um, is that okay, or are we more looking for places where you've got a section of pines, a grouping of pines, maybe, 10, 20, 30, 40, something like that, rather than those lone interspersed pines throughout an area that we run into?
It's how they're structured.
Okay, assuming they have the low-hanging branches.
Yeah, but what it is, it's how the pines are structured. How do you put it? Not every pine is going to work out. It's the quality of the pine, the age of the pine. Old pines don't help these birds at all because, first off, there's too much space in the branches toward the top between the next branch, this branch, and the next branch. Oh, you know what? An owl or a hawk would fit just perfect in there. I guess the way I could put it is if you had a 25, 30-foot ceiling and you could still put the Christmas tree in there. That's what you're looking for.
Okay.
That gives you an idea. I had a friend up in New York that had a huge timber framed house, and he would cable winch the pine tree in there every year. Picture if you were going to buy a really nice Christmas tree and you had a big vaulted ceiling that was 20-some feet high. And then you take that Christmas tree in your mind and say, okay, I need 6 or 7 or 8 of these, maybe 12 of these in a row or bunched together to make a row. That's what those birds like because it gives them escape pattern under it and they can move from one end to the other. So think of it that way. The lone tree will do a little bit, but they're going to flush out of that really quick because it's limited protection. But the best protection is when you get a grouping. And then the home run for these birds is when you get like what you were talking about, the 25, 30 trees all like super close together. And that's where I had places like that. And of course, I'm in there with the dog. And I'd have to holler out, the dog's on point again. It's facing to the west. Literally.
Yeah, those are just wonderful.
Yeah. And I said, has anyone shifted? We're down at the corners.
Yeah, and you go in and flush. We're down here on the corners.
Oh, the stuff I used to do to get the birds to come out. I mean, the dog's pointing, and you can tell the bird's ahead, and right across the front of it was a trail, and each guy was on the corners. And I said, okay, dog is about 70, 80 feet from the edge. Bird is somewhere up ahead. And then the bird always come barreling out, and the guns would go off, and And I wouldn't hear anything. I said, "Don't tell me you missed it again." I told him the dog and I are going to quit. But that's a good mental picture, is really nice Christmas trees that are tall, that are bunched together. And
Okay.
that gives those birds the options. So that works as a transition. But then you've got other pines that are like the balsam and the spruce that are young, that are on the edges, that come into like the cedar swamp, and then you usually have tag alder. I mean, it would be a good rabbit snowshoe place. Those are places the birds want to go to as well. And a lot of times when you think about it, these birds are looking for areas where the pines are. Then it might drop a little tiny bit, maybe a foot, foot and a half in elevation, real gradual as you go down lower in elevation. And then the wind blows over the top of those places. That's where they want to be when it's nasty. They'll be down in those areas, hunkered down. And if you watch them when they flush, they'll usually peel
Mhm.
off towards something like that. So much of grouse hunting, or any type of hunting or trapping or whatever you do, is observation and finding the patterns and looking at the habitat and figuring out the habitat that's being used consistently over and over and over again per season, or per transition from one season to the next. There are patterns within what we call a pattern. There's like sub patterns.
One of the things that I have found is that this is the one sport where you really want to kind of document things when you're done hunting. Where did I find the bird? What kind of cover? Obviously, you want to keep track of what cut you were in, what area you were in, and keep track of that. But you want to get a sense for where the bird was.
Yeah, because you'll eventually figure out the pattern. And sometimes all of a sudden you're hunting a new area and it's like, I remember this. And it's like a visual. And then you see
Mm-hmm.
something that's really close to it. And it's like, okay, this is how I should work this area with my dog.
Yeah. As we're talking about these covers, is it necessary or is it better to be adjacent to a young cut as we're looking at the slightly older cover? Okay. And we're looking at areas with older aspen and better understory, and we're looking for the pines, and maybe we're looking for that transition downward. Okay. Is it best to be next to a 11-year-old, 12-year-old cut?
I don't see where it's going to help you a lot unless it has good hazel brush in there,
Mm-hmm.
that it can go eat the catkins. If all it is a cut with a bunch of stems in it, the food's gone, the cover's gone. Any
Mm-hmm.
bird's a sitting duck out in there.
Right. Yeah, they're not in there, but is the older cover next to the brooding cover, is it more productive or does it not much matter at this point?
I guess I'm trying to picture what you're saying. To me, I move into something totally different. I've got young habitat out by me here that's
Mm-hmm.
8, 9 years old,
Right.
going on 10. And there was
Right.
grouse in there, but I'm not even dealing with that.
No, no, no.
It's, I mean, the only thing I've got to go by is
Mhm.
the drumming counts that I did, and the really super young cuts. It's more of a place to pass through.
Mhm.
Those birds are out of there. The hen can travel up to, typically it's 3 miles, but they have been
Mhm.
documented to go farther than that, like 10. But one of the
Okay.
time it's closer to 3. And the males are going to go in amongst where the other males are to establish their spot. And that young area was just a place that hen used for the brood range. And you found some early season in it, but then everyone's sort of taken a hike away from it. And I'm going to want to put
Okay.
myself where there's like, you're using that young cover as a marker to say, okay, what's out away from it. is there anything decent away from it where those birds are going to call home in the wintertime?
Right. And that's kind of what I was
Yeah,
asking. Do we care as we look at this older cover that we want to hunt? Do we care how far it is from the original brooding cover?
I don't. I've never gone and measured it out because there's
Hmm.
areas that I go into that there isn't a young aspen anywhere nearby within probably a quarter of a mile.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that kind of answers the question
Yeah,
there. I
and
would.
I'm picking cover that specifically it was older aspen, it was a corridor. I had my conifer, I had lots of hazelbrush, thick hazelbrush patches. I had ironwood there, and I had mature aspen that they were going to bud off of. And those are the places that I would always hit a home run in. Now, maybe in some other area, it's probably more important. But I think about that in the beginning of the season, but not really in the
Mhm.
end of the season. I think in the end of the season, what's their food source? What do they need for cover? And there is no protection right now in those areas right there. So the only thing that you can think of in that young habitat is yes, it was probably used, but everyone's left the party and gone someplace else.
Mhm. And moved a fair amount. They're not just moving a couple hundred yards into the older cover.
No, no,
Okay.
typically they're moving farther than that, but it all depends. And what you can do is like, I think of back on a place that had um let me just pull this up on my other map so I can think it through my head here. Okay, just get this opened up. Hold on here.
Hmm.
Okay, there used to be, sounds like I'm starting a story, a 1998 cut that I loved. And up the upper right hand side was a northern hardwood, and there was a little trail, and then there was spruce conifer. Now, there was parts of this during the regular season. As this cut got older, I would work this cut, but I would work the outer edges of it. This would be when, when this cut was probably 14 years old, and this was late season. I typically found where the birds would go, there was two places with spruce conifer that they would go to. And then there was a swamp hardwoods area that they would also go to. And since then, that 1998, there's a 2009 and a 2008 not too far by. But there was a couple areas where there was like a corridor coming from the spruce conifer through the northern hardwoods, just a small part of the northern hardwoods of hazelbrush. It was a drainage, is what it was. So look for the rocks, and it would basically go up into the hardwoods, and then this aspen cut was sort of flat. And it was sort of cool because where they went, it was basically about where I would find the birds. At times it was close to 2,000 feet away. And then there was another part of it where it was very quick that they would make the transition from the spruce conifer to another area, and that was 1,200 feet. And then there was other areas that it was a lot farther. So when I look at some of the areas I found them, was basically from that cut. When that cut got older, I wasn't working the center of the cuts because it was like a desert. I was working with the edge, and every edge that I see here, I was very close to spruce conifer. I had the northern hardwood, which would give me my catkins, especially if you had an ironwood. Key is ironwood understory. And then the next up and coming cut, which was that 2008, was only about 1,500 feet from one of the edges of the 1998, and then the other one, the 2009 to the 1998, was only 1,000 feet away. And so, as the 1998 got older, these birds actually went into the back end of those other cuts. But the common denominator is where are they going to pile up when the weather gets bad? And that's where you're looking at the fir spruce conifer, or something of that nature. I don't know if that gives you the picture that you need, But I used the older cut more as my base of where I was going to look for those birds, knowing that I was waiting back then. I was waiting for these other cuts to become older, and the birds would leave the younger cuts, and then they go in the older cut. Now the birds are out of the older cut because the older cut's too old, and they're using the backside of those other cuts that are close to the spruce, conifer, the northern hardwoods, and then also the swamp hardwoods. And there was actually some cedar around those areas too. So
And I was about to ask that that cut is now 25 years old.
it's
Probably got
it
some older aspen. Is this? Are you going to revisit that cut because of that?
no, because it never had a great hazel brush or subcomponent canopy in it.
Okay.
And that's part of the reason I shifted more to that. Whereas I look at another area and that aspen had an awesome shrub component and that held the birds longer. But there was the conifer on one side and then there was the hardwoods on the other side. It was like a seam. And those birds could run the length of that aspen and then veer off
Hmm.
over into the conifer anytime they wanted. The trail was between the aspen and conifer on the low side, and then there was a river. And then on the high side, it went right up into ironwood, and then it went into hardwoods. So we were down like into a basin area, and the winds would blow over the top. It was just awesome cover. Of course, they went in there and they logged it, and they took out all the doggone ironwood because ironwood's considered a junk tree. So you need to know what your ironwood looks like. You can look it up, but the bark is more vertical on it, and then it produces these small two little catkins that look like a V at the end of the branch. And I don't know how these birds balance on it because that is the flimsiest thing, and they're up there 25, 30 feet bouncing around in the understory of a hardwoods. But it's where you come walking out of an area toward evening. You still got plenty of light to get out of the woods, and all of a sudden, this bird sails from the hardwoods past you right to the conifer. It's like incoming. So I don't know if that helps.
No, that does.
In
That
my
does.
mind, I've got pictures in my mind of all the places that I've been and what I was able to do at these different places. And so many of these places, one of the keys is having that nasty, gnarly shrub going into the spruce, going into the bottomland hardwoods, dropping in elevation. And that's where they want to go. And there's like cedar in there, or there's black spruce, or on the edge there might be some balsam fir. And there's areas that don't have much of a conifer base, and so they use a lot of shrub component that sort of bends over in the snow, and they go under that, and it forms like a little, insulated area sometimes for them, or under trees that have gone down. But you still try to see if there's any conifer in those areas.
You talked about swamps earlier. Are creek bottoms, tag elders, is this something that's important? Is it something you look for?
No,
Okay.
no, no one wants to get their feet wet and be cold.
Okay.
At least that's the way I look at it.
That's fair.
And they're at this point. There's no leaves here. There's no protection. The rabbits can have it. Let's put them out there
Uh-huh.
first for the predators. We'll go back to the pines.
Okay. All right. Scratch tag elders off the list.
I
All
mean,
right.
granted,
There's birds, but it's tough to hunt too.
it's tough to hunt. It's tough to hunt, but not only that, there's no
Mhm.
protection, and they're going to run out of it, and then they're forced flushing across the swamp, and they
Okay.
really want to stick where they know the area. If you think
Right.
about it that way, they want to stay
Okay.
where it's familiar. And any chance, unless you force the flush in the direction that you want by blocking their exit, they're going to try to always go to where they feel is the safest spot. So if you have three birds get up and two of them go one way and one accidentally goes the other way, I'd bet on the two that there's something over there that they like. And sometimes that leads you to the mother lode.
Okay. And what else should we be thinking about as we change our strategies for the late season?
Timing when the frost comes off. Heavy frost, they don't move. Look for the sides that face to the east that are going to receive the sun first. And think about that in the cut. What part of the cut edge receives the sun first? Work that
Okay.
first.
We want to be thinking about hillsides and stuff that are facing the sun in the morning.
Um, no, I mean, okay, so here you have,
Okay.
like, I think back about that 1998 cut,
Okay.
and I'd park in one spot, and I'd tell the guys, okay, we'll walk a little bit, and then we're going to sweep around, and I'm going to come to where the cut edge narrows, and it's right up along the bottomland hardwoods, and there was a little bit of tag alder, and then the spruce conifer, and there was other conifer in there. And I want to give the birds enough time to come up out from under the pines and move into the hazel brush on that side because it was really gravelly. So they were wanting to feed. So here you got the sun coming up, and we'd sit and drink our coffee in the morning, and I'd watch the vehicles, and I'd look for the frost to basically start getting pretty much halfway off the vehicles, if that makes any sense. Or, the frost was off the hand railings or
Mm-hmm.
the
The windshields.
yeah, everything like that. And
Mm-hmm.
and you start to see it, and I'd say it's time to go because I knew about how much time I had to get them in the vehicle, drive out there, get unloaded, get the dogs out, get us all walking one way, and then timing it. So as I was starting to see all this, I'm thinking, okay, I've got 30 minutes before it's just right, or 40 minutes or whatever. How far do I have to drive? And I would say, okay, we're going to have to go in 5, 10, 20 minutes, something like that. As I said, I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to time this all. And that's what I would do, is that I would time when I had to be in the spot, when the temperature's going to start really warming an area up. And they do. As the temperature warms up, then they come out. So we would just time it, and I'm looking at when the frost is off. It won't be completely dry, but you got to think about it. When you have multiple frost, after a while the weeds just sort of bend over,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not really going to get the grouse wet. And they'd start feeding because it was time to eat, and that's why I was timing. And the sun would come up, and it just start to hit an area. And that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to give the birds enough time to get out from under the pines and for us to come in between the pines and the birds feeding. So I was coming through that edge and timing it, that knowing that enough of the frost had come off, the birds are trying to feed, and they're not so close that they can escape back. I can be in between where they were and where they are right now. So,
Got it. Hey, one last question about cover this time of year. Until the snow is down, do you think about oaks a lot?
I imagine there's other people that do, and I really can't talk too much about it because I'm not in an oak area.
Okay.
I think if I had to hunt different areas that had different food sources, I'd learn them for sure. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm not in an oak area. I'm in typically aspen, hardwoods, and
Mm-hmm.
lowland areas. And my area is pretty much defined, but it's also one of the first areas that gets snow. It's one of the first areas that really gets brutal winters compared to a lot of other areas. From my area north gets
Mm-hmm.
pretty nasty. And you don't have to go but maybe 30 miles, 40 miles north, and you really start getting into the sugar maples that then go all the way up into Michigan. The whole topography starts to change.
Okay. Okay. Because we have been trying to key on oaks a little bit. Northeast Wisconsin has a lot of oaks.
Sure, your sandier
And
soil, lighter soil over there.
okay. All right. And that makes sense. And even within a cut, okay,
Mhm.
usually the loggers will leave leave a lot of the really big oaks, and it creates a little microcosm of cover.
Mm-hmm.
You now you've got this open area, and you'll find some hazelbrush, and you'll find a lot of lower cover in those areas, plus acorns on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And I was curious how that played into your strategy when you run into that.
Yeah, and I mean, there are not many oaks here. You have a few on top of the knolls, but
Mm-hmm.
there's bottomland and
Uh-huh.
hardwoods with the aspen in between. And
Okay.
then you go into other areas into Wisconsin, and it's aspen with just a little bit of northern hardwoods and sometimes very little conifer. And there's a different strategy for those areas. That's where the shrub component comes in. And those areas tend to have really good hazelbrush, and that's a nice food source and protection for the birds.
Okay. Well, thank you. I think that's a nice summary of what we want to be looking for as we move forward. Is there a difference between November and December hunting? Okay, as we get further into the late season here in Wisconsin, and I think most of the Midwest, um, we can hunt into December, at least until the snow is such that we just don't, it just doesn't make sense anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for me personally, the season will end when I have to, when I have to trudge through a lot of snow. It's just not fun at that point. Yeah, there are birds out there, but it's just not fun. But if there isn't a lot of snow on the ground, if there's an inch or two or three or something like that, I may keep it up right until the snow makes it hard to get around. Is there a change in strategy as we get a little further into the late season?
Yeah, you don't have to cover quite as much ground. You're in a hunt. That's what I would do. By then, I would know my areas. Okay, I want to go to this one. I want to go over to this spot, and it's that spot. And I'd be
Mhm.
timing it at certain times during the feeding times. But with something very much in the forefront of my mind is I would also be remembering how many birds I've taken out of an area so that you don't kill off next year's
Yeah,
birds.
right.
Because the grouping of birds, if you have 7 birds go up, there'll probably only be one male in that group because they don't get along with each other. And it'll be happen to be the hens, for all I know, in Harry's spot. You know. And so you
Hmm.
got to think about how many you take out of an area, and then say you go back. Oh, I found some. They were over here. Well, it's probably the same group of birds in that area that are moving back and forth between those males. So think about how many, because those are the hens. So make sure you have enough spots. And a lot of people that come and say, "Oh, well, it doesn't matter. I don't live here." Well, it does matter.
It does matter.
It's part of hunting ethics. And I know when I was guiding, I always tried to make sure that I had enough places to go where I want to make sure I'd have enough for the next year. You practice conservation. But then another thing I'm going to say is that, and there's a lot of people look at it and say, "Oh, you can hunt grouse during deer season in Wisconsin."
No, no.
They may put it in there that you can, but only an idiot would. I mean, it's one thing if you're on your own property. I don't have a problem with that because I still train within my own property. But I'm not going to take my dogs out in the woods during hunting season. There's no way. And you got to think about it. Here's the thing. We look forward to the start of our hunting season and everything that comes with it. The deer hunters look forward to the start of rifle season and
Yes, they do.
traditions. It's a tradition for many. And the last thing they want to see or hear is a grouse hunter going through the woods, boing, 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 with the dog and a bell.
Mhm.
And he's waited all year for this. Don't do it. I mean, I'd be upset if I was them. I mean, we all have to share the woods. But just because Wisconsin's not smart enough to say, "I'm sorry, we're closing the grouse season down during the middle of deer season," I've literally had to talk people out of not coming up here because it's not safe.
It's just not safe, and it's just not smart. It's not considerate.
No.
I had this exact same conversation with one of my hunting buddies because they don't close the pheasant season either.
Mm-hmm.
And he was hunting down here in east central Wisconsin, and same deal. He had a stand all set up, he had trail cams up, he done his homework, and what comes through but a pheasant hunter? We had a pretty spirited conversation about that, because it really spoiled his morning.
Right.
It's just not a good idea.
It's not a good idea, and you have to respect other people's seasons as well.
Right. Absolutely. This has been a really great, really kind of a review of how we want to transition as the season moves along. Is there anything else you want to add? Is there anything we missed on this?
I mean, I'm not going to think of everything in these podcasts because I'm just sort of rambling and then, of course, somehow jumping into elephants and.
I'm going to look up. I am going to go online. I'm going to see what the DNR is doing with that. So
yeah, elephants and elements. Well, no one can say that we don't make this a little interesting at times.
We have fun. That's the main thing.
That is the main thing. But there'll be other questions people have. So send your questions in. I'll do my best to answer them. And as always, if I don't know, I'm going to tell you.
Right. And as always, where would you like people to send those questions?
So you're going to go to www.mobilehuntingmaps.com. And when you get to the front page with the grouse looking at you like, don't you dare shoot me.
That's Charlie, by the way.
Yeah, it's Charlie. Or Charlie's mom. I don't know which. Go to Upland Hunting, and then you'll have a drop-down menu come. It'll talk grouse hunting, pheasant hunting, quail hunting, woodcock hunting, hunt to habitat articles, and then there'll be a tab there that says podcast. Click on the podcast, scroll down a little ways. It says join the conversation, and you can put your comments in there and your information. And if you want to listen to any of the other podcasts, we've got some podcasts that we've done, and then I've got other podcasts that I've done on other shows. So as always, please let us know if you've got a question because we'd be happy to talk about it and try to help you.
All right. And thank you again. And everybody remember, as we move forward into November, we'll be doing another podcast. And thank you.
You're more than welcome.
All right. And everybody always remember to hunt the habitat.
Sounds good. Take care, Steve.
All right. Thanks, Ann. See ya.
Bye.